The last piece of turkey was cold and congealed on my plate when I heard Sterling's BMW pull out of my driveway at 6 a.m. on Christmas morning. Through the kitchen window, I watched my ex-husband load ski equipment into his car while my 3 adult children, Quentin, Peyton, and Sloane, climbed eagerly into the back seat with their expensive winter gear and matching luggage sets. Blair Ashford, Sterling's 45-year-old girlfriend, sat in the passenger seat wearing a designer ski outfit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. She was laughing at something Sterling had said, her perfectly manicured hand resting possessively on his arm as he adjusted the rearview mirror. I stood at my kitchen sink in my worn bathrobe, holding a cup of reheated coffee and watching my family drive away to spend Christmas at a luxury resort in Aspen, without me. "Mom, you know you can't ski," Quentin had explained 2 weeks ago when they'd announced their holiday plans. "Your arthritis would never handle the slopes, and honestly, it would just be awkward with Blair there. You understand, right? Besides," Peyton had added with the casual cruelty that seemed to come so naturally to my middle child, "you'd just slow everyone down. This is supposed to be a fun, active vacation." "We'll see you when we get back," Sloane had promised, already scrolling through resort websites on her phone. "Maybe we can do a late Christmas dinner or something." A late Christmas dinner or something. As if 43 years of my life spent creating magical Christmas mornings for them could be dismissed with such casual indifference. I'd raised 3 children who apparently saw me as nothing more than an inconvenient obligation. A 70-year-old divorced woman who couldn't keep up with their affluent lifestyles and would only embarrass them in front of their father's glamorous new girlfriend. The house felt cavernously empty without the chaos of Christmas morning that had defined my adult life for over 4 decades. No excited voices, no rustling wrapping paper, no children's laughter echoing through rooms that now contained only the ghost of family traditions that had died along with my marriage. I spent the day doing what lonely people do on Christmas. I cleaned the house that was already clean, watched holiday movies that made me cry, and ate leftover turkey that tasted like disappointment. I called my sister in Phoenix, but she was busy hosting her own family gathering and could only talk for 10 minutes before rushing off to check the prime rib. "Dot, why don't you come visit us next year?" she'd suggested, with the kind of vague politeness that meant she was already thinking about hanging up. "We'd love to have you." But we both knew she wouldn't follow through on that invitation, and I wouldn't have the courage to take her up on it anyway. By evening, I was sitting in Sterling's old recliner, the one piece of furniture he'd left behind because it didn't match Blair's modern aesthetic, wearing the same bathrobe I'd worn all day, and wondering when exactly I'd become the kind of person whose own children found excuses to avoid spending holidays with her. The divorce 5 years ago had changed everything between my children and me. Not immediately, but gradually, like a slow leak that eventually drains all the water from a pool. Sterling's departure had somehow diminished my value in their eyes, as if being abandoned by their father had revealed some fundamental inadequacy they'd never noticed before. Or maybe they'd always seen me as boring and burdensome, and marriage to their successful, charismatic father had simply disguised their true feelings about their ordinary, unglamorous mother. Sterling Carmichael had been 57 when he announced he was leaving our 38-year marriage for his assistant. "I need to feel alive again, Dot," he'd explained, with the kind of self-serving psychology that men use to justify devastating their families. "Blair makes me feel young and energetic in ways I'd forgotten were possible." What he'd really meant was that Blair was 23 years younger than me, had perky breasts and no arthritis, and didn't remind him daily that he was approaching 70 with nothing to show for his life except a moderately successful insurance agency and 3 adult children who called him only when they needed money. The settlement had been fair, but not generous. Enough to maintain my modest lifestyle, but not enough to compete with Sterling's newfound prosperity or Blair's expensive tastes. While I was clipping coupons and buying generic groceries, Sterling was taking his new family on European vacations and skiing trips to Aspen. And my children, who'd grown up in comfortable middle-class circumstances, had clearly decided that prosperity was more appealing than loyalty. At 11 p.m., I was about to turn off the Christmas tree lights and go to bed when someone knocked on my front door. I looked through the peephole and saw 3 men in dark suits standing on my porch under the yellow glow of my porch light. They looked official and serious, and for a moment I wondered if something terrible had happened to my family during their drive to Colorado. "Mrs. Carmichael?" asked the tallest man when I opened the door. He was probably in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that suggested expensive education and significant professional success. "Yes, that's me. Is everything all right? Has something happened to my family?" "No, ma'am. My name is Jonathan Pierce, and these are my colleagues David Chen and Marcus Rodriguez. We're attorneys with Goldman Lux. We've been trying to reach you about an urgent matter regarding your father's estate." "My father? My father died when I was 2 years old. There's no estate to discuss." "Mrs. Carmichael, I think there's been some confusion about your family history. May we come in? What we need to discuss is quite complex and shouldn't be handled on your front porch." I led them into my living room, suddenly self-conscious about my bathrobe and the scattered remnants of my solitary Christmas dinner. These men looked like they belonged in corporate boardrooms or exclusive country clubs, not in my modest suburban home with its dated furniture and clearance sale decorations. "Mrs. Carmichael," Jonathan Pierce began, settling into my sofa and opening an expensive leather briefcase. "Your biological father was Archibald Thornfield, founder and CEO of Thornfield Capital Ventures. He didn't die when you were 2. He abandoned your mother when you were 2, but he lived until 3 months ago." "I don't understand. My mother told me my father died in a car accident." "Your mother told you that to protect you from the pain of abandonment. Archibald Thornfield was a wealthy but emotionally unavailable man who left your mother to pursue his business interests. However, he never stopped monitoring your life from a distance." "Monitoring my life? What does that mean?" "It means he hired private investigators to track your education, your marriage, your children's achievements, and your general welfare. He never contacted you directly, but he maintained detailed knowledge of your circumstances for 65 years. Why? Because 3 months ago, he died and left you everything." The room began spinning around me as I tried to process what these men were telling me. My father, who I'd believed was dead for my entire life, had actually been alive and watching me while building a fortune that he'd somehow decided to leave to the daughter he'd abandoned. Everything meaning what, exactly? Jonathan Pierce pulled documents from his briefcase and spread them across my coffee table between the remnants of my Christmas dinner and my cold cup of coffee. "Everything meaning $340 million, Mrs. Carmichael. You've inherited one of the largest private venture capital funds in the country. Some Christmas mornings bring presents under the tree. This Christmas night brought 3 lawyers to my door with news that would change everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, and my father, who'd been dead to me for 65 years but had apparently been very much alive and very, very wealthy. And the family who'd abandoned me to spend Christmas in Aspen had no idea that the boring, inconvenient mother they'd left behind had just become one of the wealthiest women in America. I sat in my living room at midnight on Christmas, staring at documents that contained more zeros than I'd ever imagined could belong to one person, while 3 attorneys waited patiently for my shock to subside enough for coherent conversation. "Mrs. Carmichael, I know this is overwhelming," Jonathan Pierce said gently. "Take your time processing this information." $340 million, I repeated, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. "You're telling me that my father, who abandoned me when I was 2 years old, spent 65 years building a fortune that he's now leaving to me?" "Precisely. And according to his very detailed instructions, this inheritance was to be revealed to you only after both his death and your 70th birthday. Whichever came last. Why those specific conditions?" David Chen, the younger of the 3 lawyers, consulted his notes before answering. "Mr. Thornfield wanted to ensure you'd lived a complete life independent of his wealth before receiving this inheritance. He felt that sudden money in youth could corrupt character development, but that financial security in later years could enhance whatever wisdom and values you'd developed naturally. He was watching me for 65 years and making judgments about my character development. Comprehensive surveillance," Marcus Rodriguez confirmed, pulling out a thick folder. "Education records, employment history, marriage and family details, community involvement, charitable giving patterns, personal integrity assessments. Your father maintained detailed files about your life choices and moral character." The violation of privacy was staggering, but I found myself more curious than angry about what those files contained. "What did his surveillance conclude about my character?" "That you were exactly the kind of person he'd hoped his daughter would become," Jonathan said. "Hardworking, devoted to family, community-minded, financially responsible despite limited resources, and generous within your means." Generous within my means? I laughed bitterly. I've been clipping coupons and buying generic groceries for 5 years. What generosity could he possibly have observed? Marcus opened the surveillance folder and pulled out photographs that made my breath catch. Pictures of me volunteering at the local food bank, tutoring children at the library, bringing meals to elderly neighbors, organizing coat drives for homeless shelters, activities I'd considered normal human decency rather than charitable giving. Mr. Thornfield was particularly impressed by your volunteer work during your divorce proceedings, David noted. Despite your own financial struggles and emotional trauma, you increased your community service rather than becoming self-absorbed or bitter. You have photographs of me during my divorce. Your father wanted to understand how you handled major life crises. He felt that a person's response to adversity revealed their true character more accurately than their behavior during prosperous times. I studied the photographs of myself from 5 years ago, exhausted, heartbroken, trying to maintain dignity while my world collapsed around me. The idea that someone had been watching and documenting my most vulnerable moments felt both invasive and oddly validating. What happens now? Do I just become rich overnight? The transition will be gradual and carefully managed, Jonathan explained. Mr. Thornfield established a trust structure that allows you to access funds incrementally while learning to manage substantial wealth responsibly. How incrementally? $5 million immediately available for personal use, with additional releases based on your comfort level and demonstrated financial planning capabilities. $5 million. The amount was so abstract, I couldn't comprehend what it actually meant in practical terms. And the rest of the inheritance? Held in trust until you decide how you want to structure your long-term financial management. Mr. Thornfield's instructions emphasized that you should have complete control over distribution, investment strategies, and philanthropic priorities. Philanthropic priorities? Your father assumed that someone with your demonstrated character would want to use significant wealth for charitable purposes, but he left all decisions about causes and amounts entirely to your discretion. I thought about my family spending Christmas in Aspen, posting photos on social media of their luxury vacation while their mother sat alone eating leftover turkey. The irony was so profound it felt like cosmic justice. Gentlemen, I need to ask about confidentiality. My family doesn't need to know about this inheritance immediately, correct? Mr. Thornfield was very specific about privacy protocols, Jonathan confirmed. The inheritance disclosure is entirely at your discretion. You can tell anyone you choose or no one, depending on your preferences and circumstances. Why would he emphasize privacy? Because he understood that sudden wealth often changes family dynamics in ways that aren't always beneficial. He wanted you to have time to adjust to your new circumstances before dealing with other people's expectations and potential demands. What kind of demands? David pulled out additional documentation that made me feel sick to my stomach. Mr. Thornfield's research into your family relationships indicated that your children's attentiveness to your welfare might be variable depending on their perception of your financial status. You investigated my children? Superficial background checks to understand family dynamics. Nothing invasive, just public records and social media activity analysis. And what did you conclude? Marcus Rodriguez looked uncomfortable before answering honestly. That your children's emotional support and time investment in your welfare decreased significantly following your divorce, particularly as their father's financial situation improved with his new relationship. The assessment stung because it was accurate. Before the divorce, Quentin, Peyton, and Sloan had been attentive children who called regularly and included me in their social activities. Afterward, I'd become the boring, financially struggling mother they visited out of obligation rather than genuine desire for my company. Mr. Thornfield recommended that you observe your family's behavior for several months before making any decisions about sharing your inheritance information, Jonathan added. He felt that wealth could either reveal or corrupt character, and that you should understand people's authentic feelings before money complicated their motivations. Essentially, he's giving me the opportunity to test my family's character before they know I have anything to offer them? Exactly. I looked around my modest living room, the dated furniture, the clearance sale decorations, the small television that Sterling had left behind, and tried to imagine what my life would look like with unlimited financial resources. Gentlemen, what would you recommend as a first step for someone who's never managed substantial wealth? Education, Jonathan said immediately. Financial planning, legal consultation, tax strategy development, and most importantly, taking time to consider your priorities and values before making major decisions. But I could, theoretically, buy myself a first-class ticket to Aspen tomorrow and show up at my family's luxury resort? The three lawyers exchanged glances that suggested they'd encountered newly wealthy clients who'd made exactly that kind of impulsive decision. You could do that, David confirmed carefully. But Mr. Thornfield's experience suggested that restraint and strategic thinking usually led to better outcomes than immediate dramatic gestures, even when those dramatic gestures would be deeply satisfying. Especially then. Some people spend Christmas opening presents under the tree with their loving families. I'd spent Christmas discovering that the father who'd abandoned me had spent 6 decades creating the largest gift I could ever imagine, while my actual family abandoned me for a ski vacation. And now I had to decide whether to use my newfound wealth for immediate revenge or long-term strategy in dealing with children who'd just revealed exactly how little they valued their mother's company. The lawyers left at 1:30 a.m. after spending 2 hours explaining trust structures, tax implications, and something called wealth transition psychology that apparently involved not making dramatic life changes for at least 90 days. I sat in my kitchen until dawn, staring at business cards from Goldman Lux and trying to process the reality that I was no longer Dot Carmichael, the divorced woman whose children found her too boring for Christmas vacation. I was now Dot Carmichael, heir to a fortune that exceeded the GDP of small countries. The irony was so perfect, it felt like divine intervention. On the same night my family abandoned me for luxury skiing with my ex-husband's girlfriend, I'd inherited enough money to buy the resort where they were staying, and probably the entire mountain. But Jonathan Pierce's warnings about strategic thinking echoed in my mind as I made coffee and tried to imagine what revenge would actually accomplish beyond momentary satisfaction. At 8 a.m., my phone rang with a text from Sloan. "Merry Christmas, Mom. Resort is amazing. Wish you were here." The casual cruelty of that message, wishing I were there after specifically excluding me, made me want to immediately book the most expensive suite at whatever resort they'd chosen and arrive with a fleet of personal assistants and enough jewelry to blind Blair Ashford. Instead, I texted back, "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Enjoy your vacation." By 10 a.m., I was sitting in my car outside Wells Fargo, holding the debit card that David Chen had given me with access to my initial discretionary funds. $5 million available immediately, no questions asked. "The card has a daily limit of $50,000, he'd explained. "If you need larger amounts, call our office and we'll arrange transfers within 24 hours. $50,000 per day. I'd lived on less than $30,000 per year since my divorce. I drove through the ATM and checked my account balance just to see if the numbers were real. The screen displayed available balance $4,999, $847.23. The 53 cents represented the remaining balance from my previous account, which Goldman Lux had absorbed into the new trust structure. Somehow, seeing my old life represented by pocket change made the transformation feel complete and surreal. My phone buzzed with Instagram notifications. Quinton had posted photos from Aspen, the family group sitting around a restaurant table, everyone laughing and looking prosperous in their designer ski wear. Sterling had his arm around Blair, who was wearing what appeared to be a diamond necklace that sparkled even in the restaurant lighting. The caption read, "Perfect Christmas vacation with my favorite people. Blessed, Marn family, Narn Aspen." I wasn't in any of the photos, of course. For social media purposes, I simply didn't exist. Peyton had posted a video of himself skiing down what looked like an expert slope, with the caption, "Living my best life. Some people were made for adventure. Skiing. Der no excuses, der active lifestyle." The hashtag no excuses felt like a direct reference to my supposed inability to keep up with their active vacation plans. Sloane's post was perhaps the cruelest. A selfie of her and Blair getting spa treatments, with the caption, "So grateful for family who understand self-care and living beautifully. Shash family, our spa, a living my best life." The message was clear. Their new family unit, Sterling, Blair, and my 3 children, represented modern, active, beautiful living, while I represented everything they wanted to leave behind. I drove to Target and bought the most expensive laptop they had, along with software for managing personal finances and investment portfolios. If I was going to be wealthy, I wanted to understand exactly what that meant and how to use money strategically rather than emotionally. That evening, I spent 4 hours researching Thornfield Capital Ventures and my biological father's business empire. Archibald Thornfield had been a legend in venture capital, identifying and funding technology startups that became household names. His investment portfolio included early stakes in companies that were now worth billions. But the most interesting discovery was his reputation for what business journalists called patient capital, long-term investments in people and ideas that others considered too risky or unconventional. He'd apparently applied the same philosophy to me, investing 65 years of surveillance and strategic planning in a daughter he'd never met, but whose character development he'd monitored like a long-term business proposition. The psychological profile that Goldman Lux had provided painted a picture of a brilliant but emotionally detached man who'd regretted abandoning his family but had been too proud or damaged to reconnect directly. Instead, he'd created an elaborate inheritance structure that would allow him to provide for me while testing my worthiness from beyond the grave. Your father was a complex man who believed that character was revealed through choices made when people thought no one was watching, Jonathan Pierce had explained. He spent decades watching you make choices, and he was impressed by what he observed. I thought about the last 5 years since my divorce, the humiliation of Sterling leaving me for a younger woman, the gradual cooling of my relationships with my children, the financial struggles and social isolation that had defined my daily existence. During those years, I'd continued volunteering at the food bank every Tuesday, not because I felt generous, but because seeing people with less than I had reminded me that my problems were manageable. I'd tutored children at the library because I enjoyed sharing knowledge, not because I thought anyone was documenting my charitable activities. I'd maintained my dignity during the divorce proceedings, refusing to fight dirty or involve the children in adult conflicts, because that behavior felt beneath me, not because I was performing for invisible surveillance. According to Archibald Thornfield's assessment, those choices had revealed character traits worth $340 million. My phone rang at 9 p.m. with a call from Sterling. Dot, just wanted to check on you. The kids were worried about you spending Christmas alone. The kids were worried? I repeated, noting that his concern was secondhand and probably insincere. Well, we all were. Blair specifically asked me to call and make sure you were doing all right. Blair had asked him to call. The woman who'd replaced me was now managing Sterling's minimal obligations to his ex-wife. I'm fine, Sterling. Enjoying a quiet holiday at home. Good, good. Listen, the kids want to take you to dinner when we get back. Maybe that new Italian place you like. A post-vacation guilt dinner at a moderately priced restaurant. Their token effort to salve their consciences about abandoning me on Christmas. That sounds lovely. When are you planning to return? New Year's Day. We're staying through New Year's Eve. Apparently, there's an amazing party at the resort. Another week of luxury vacation while their abandoned mother continued her solitary existence. Well, have a wonderful time. Tell everyone I said hello. I will. And Dot, thanks for being understanding about the whole Aspen thing. It means a lot that you're not making this complicated for the kids. Understanding. As if my exclusion from family Christmas had been a reasonable accommodation rather than cruel rejection. Of course, Sterling, enjoy your vacation. After hanging up, I sat in my living room holding $5 million worth of financial freedom and thinking about character tests and patient capital and the difference between revenge and justice. My family thought they'd left behind a boring, financially struggling woman who would gratefully accept whatever scraps of attention they offered upon their return. They had no idea they'd abandoned a woman who now had enough money to buy their entire lifestyle 10 times over. And thanks to Archibald Thornfield's strategic planning, I had time to decide exactly how to use that knowledge. 3 days after my family's departure, I was sitting in the offices of Goldman Lux, learning the practical aspects of being extraordinarily wealthy. Jonathan Pierce had arranged meetings with financial planners, tax attorneys, and what they called lifestyle consultants, people whose job was apparently to help newly rich individuals avoid making expensive mistakes. Mrs. Carmichael, the most common error we see among inheritance recipients is immediate dramatic lifestyle changes that attract unwanted attention and create unrealistic expectations among family members. explained Catherine Walsh, a wealth counselor who specialized in what she called inheritance psychology. What kind of dramatic changes? Expensive cars, luxury homes, extravagant gifts, designer clothing, visible displays of wealth that signal to everyone around you that your circumstances have fundamentally changed. And what's wrong with that? Nothing, if that's what you genuinely want. But most clients find that sudden lifestyle inflation creates more problems than pleasure. Family members begin treating you differently. Friends develop expectations about expensive entertainment, and you become a target for people who view wealthy individuals as resources rather than relationships. I thought about Sterling and Blair's Instagram posts from Aspen, displaying their expensive vacation like trophies of successful living. What would you recommend as an alternative approach? Gradual integration of wealth into your existing lifestyle, strategic philanthropy that aligns with your values, and careful observation of how people respond to subtle changes before making major revelations. You mean testing people's motives before they know I have money to offer them? Precisely. Your father's inheritance structure was designed to give you that opportunity. Catherine pulled out a portfolio of case studies from previous clients who'd inherited significant wealth later in life. This woman inherited $80 million at age 72. She spent 6 months quietly observing her family's behavior before revealing her inheritance. What she discovered led her to restructure her will and dramatically reduce the amounts designated for children who'd been treating her poorly. And this client inherited $150 million at age 68. Used the money to test his adult children's willingness to provide emotional support when they thought he was financially struggling. The results were illuminating. How so? When he pretended to need financial help, 3 of his 4 children suggested he sell his house and move to assisted living, rather than offering any personal assistance. The 4th child offered to help personally and emotionally. The inheritance distribution reflected those revealed priorities. The pattern was becoming clear. Sudden wealth created opportunities for character assessment that couldn't be achieved any other way. Mrs. Carmichael, may I ask about your current family dynamics? How would you describe your relationships with your children? Distant since my divorce 5 years ago. They maintain minimal contact and seem to view me as an obligation rather than someone whose company they actually enjoy. And their father's relationship with them? Much closer, especially since he began including them in luxury vacations and expensive entertainment with his new girlfriend. So their attention and affection currently correlate with their father's ability to provide upscale experiences? Apparently so. Catherine made notes in my file before continuing. That pattern suggests your children have learned to associate love and family connection with financial generosity rather than emotional availability. Which means that revealing your inheritance might temporarily improve their attentiveness, but it would be impossible to determine whether that improvement represented genuine affection or calculated interest in your money. So you're recommending that I test their character before revealing my inheritance? I'm recommending that you gather information about their authentic feelings before introducing variables that might contaminate their responses. That afternoon, I drove past Sterling's house, the house where I'd lived for 22 years before Blair's redecorating had erased all evidence of my existence. The Christmas decorations I'd chosen and arranged for decades had been replaced by professional holiday styling that looked expensive but soulless. I parked across the street and called Quentin, my eldest, who answered on the 4th ring with the distracted tone he used when he considered me an interruption. "Hi, Mom. What's up? We're getting ready for dinner at this amazing restaurant. I just wanted to hear about your vacation. Are you having a wonderful time?" "It's incredible. This resort is like nothing I've ever experienced. The spa, the restaurants, the skiing conditions. Dad really went all out this year. I'm so glad you're enjoying yourselves." "Yeah, and Blair has been amazing. She's so much fun, and she really knows how to plan activities that everyone enjoys. She even arranged for a private ski instructor for Sarah." Blair was amazing. Blair knew how to plan activities everyone enjoyed. The subtext was unmistakable, unlike his boring mother who couldn't ski and would have dampened their expensive fun. "That sounds wonderful, Quentin. I hope you'll tell me all about it when you get home." "Sure, Mom. Listen, I need to go. We're running late for our reservation." "Of course, sweetheart. Enjoy your dinner." After hanging up, I sat in my car across from my former home and made a decision that felt both calculated and necessary. When my family returned from their vacation, I was going to conduct my own character assessment before revealing anything about my changed circumstances. If my children were capable of loving me for who I was rather than what I could provide, I needed to know that before money complicated every interaction for the rest of our relationships. That evening, I began planning what Catherine Walsh would probably call controlled testing scenarios, situations designed to reveal authentic behavior and priorities. My phone buzzed with another Instagram post from Peyton, a group photo of my family at what appeared to be the resort's most expensive restaurant, everyone looking prosperous and happy. The caption read, "Perfect family dinner. Life is good when you're surrounded by people who share your values. Our family, our blessed, Lars living well." People who shared their values that apparently included excluding elderly mothers who couldn't afford luxury vacations or keep up with active lifestyle demands. I screenshot the photo and saved it to a folder I'd created called Evidence. By the time my family returned from Aspen, I intended to have a clear understanding of exactly how they viewed me and our relationships. And then I'd decide whether they deserved to know that the boring, financially struggling mother they'd abandoned for Christmas had inherited enough money to fund their luxury lifestyle preferences for the next several centuries. Some people use wealth to buy affection from family members who've been neglecting them. I was planning to use wealth to determine whether my family was capable of genuine affection before deciding if they deserved access to resources that could change all our lives forever. The difference between those approaches, I was beginning to understand, would determine whether money would heal or destroy whatever remained of our relationships. And thanks to Archibald Thornfield's patient capital philosophy, I had time to make that assessment carefully and strategically, rather than emotionally and impulsively. My father had spent 65 years studying my character from a distance. Now it was my turn to study my children's character from a position of hidden strength. New Year's Day arrived with my family's return from Aspen and a text from Sloan. "Back from amazing trip. Can we do dinner this week? Want to tell you all about it." The exclamation points felt performative, like enthusiasm she thought she was supposed to display toward her mother after abandoning her for an entire week. I spent the morning preparing for what Catherine Walsh had called controlled observation opportunities, interactions designed to reveal authentic behavior when people didn't know they were being assessed. My first experiment would be simple, testing my children's willingness to spend time with me when no luxury entertainment was involved. "I'd love to have dinner," I texted back to Sloan. "Would you like to come here? I could make your favorite pot roast." The response took 3 hours. "Actually, Mom, we were thinking more like going out somewhere. Maybe that Italian place Dad mentioned? It would be easier for everyone." Easier for everyone. Translation: less time-consuming than a home-cooked meal that required actual conversation and attention to their mother's company. I arranged dinner at Marcello's, a moderately priced restaurant that served decent Italian food, but wasn't expensive enough to suggest I'd come into money. On Tuesday evening, I arrived early and watched my 3 children enter together, looking tanned and relaxed from their expensive vacation. "Mom, you look—" Quentin paused, apparently searching for a compliment that wouldn't be entirely false. "You look rested." "Thank you, dear. You all look wonderful, very healthy and happy." "The mountain air and exercise were incredible," Peyton said, settling into his chair and immediately checking his phone. "I've never felt more energetic. There's nothing like an active vacation to reset your entire system." "And the resort was just magical," Sloan added. "The spa treatments, the gourmet restaurants, the activities, every detail was perfect." "It sounds like you had an amazing time. I want to hear all about it." For the next hour, my children regaled me with detailed descriptions of their luxury vacation. The private ski lessons, the 5-star meals, the spa treatments, the New Year's Eve party that apparently cost more per person than I spent on groceries in 3 months. "Blair was so thoughtful about planning activities everyone would enjoy," Quentin explained. "She really understands how to create memorable experiences." "She's remarkably sophisticated about travel and hospitality," Peyton agreed. "Dad's lucky to have found someone who shares his appreciation for quality experiences." Quality experiences. The phrase stung because it implied that experiences with me, their actual mother, lacked quality by comparison. "And how is your father doing?" I asked, noting that they'd mentioned Blair extensively, but barely referenced Sterling. "Dad seems really happy," Sloan said carefully. The relationship with Blair has been good for him. She encourages him to try new things and live more adventurously, unlike his boring ex-wife, who'd apparently encouraged him to live safely and predictably for 38 years. I'm glad he's happy, and I'm glad you all enjoyed spending Christmas together. Mom, we hope you understand why we couldn't include you this year, Quentin said, with the careful tone of someone delivering rehearsed justification. The activities were really demanding, and honestly, it might have been awkward with Blair there. I understand completely. Maybe next year we could plan something more inclusive, Sloane offered. Like a beach vacation where everyone could relax together. A beach vacation where the elderly divorced mother could sit quietly while her family enjoyed activities that didn't require her active participation. That sounds lovely, dear. As dinner continued, I noticed patterns that had probably existed for years, but that I was now observing with the systematic attention that wealth counselors called behavioral assessment. My children talked extensively about their own experiences and achievements, but asked no questions about my life, interests, or feelings. They mentioned future plans that didn't include me and referenced shared experiences with their father and Blair, as if those relationships were more significant than our family history. Most revealing was their casual assumption that I would be grateful for whatever minimal attention they offered, regardless of how it was scheduled around their other priorities. Mom, we should do this more often, Peyton said as we prepared to leave. It's nice to catch up. I agree. How often were you thinking? Oh, regularly. When schedules allow. When schedules allow. Not when they missed their mother or wanted to spend time with me, but when their busy, important lives had occasional gaps that could accommodate their abandoned parent. Of course, I'm always available. We know, Mom, Sloane said, hugging me with the quick, perfunctory affection she might show to a distant relative. That's what's so great about you. You're always there when we need you, when they needed me. Not when I needed them, but when I could serve some purpose in their lives. Driving home, I felt both heartbroken and validated. The character assessment Catherine Walsh had recommended was revealing exactly what I'd suspected but hadn't wanted to acknowledge. My children saw me as a resource rather than a relationship. They loved me, in the abstract way people love family members. They're obligated to maintain contact with, but they didn't actually enjoy my company or prioritize my emotional welfare. The next morning, I began phase 2 of my character assessment, testing their willingness to provide support during what they'd perceive as a family crisis. I called Quentin first, adopting the worried tone I'd perfected during 43 years of motherhood. Quentin, I need to talk to someone about a situation that's been developing, and I'm not sure how to handle it. What's wrong, Mom? I've been having some financial difficulties since the divorce, and they're getting worse instead of better. The house needs major repairs that I can't afford, and my medical expenses have increased significantly. Oh, well, that's challenging. Have you talked to Dad about adjusting the divorce settlement? Your father has his own financial obligations now, with Blair and their lifestyle. I don't want to create problems for him. Right. Well, what about, have you looked into government assistance programs? Or maybe downsizing to something more manageable? Downsizing? Maybe sell the house and move into a senior community or something. Those places handle maintenance and often include medical services. It might be more practical for your situation. My oldest son, who'd just spent a week at a luxury resort, was suggesting that his financially struggling mother sell her home and move to assisted living rather than offering any personal assistance or emotional support. I see. Thank you for the suggestion, Quentin. Sure, Mom. I hope you figure something out. Let me know if you need help researching facilities or anything. Help researching facilities. Not help with the actual problems, but help finding institutional solutions that would remove me from being his responsibility. I called Peyton next, testing whether he'd respond differently to news of my financial struggles. That's tough, Mom, he said, after I explained the same fictional crisis. Have you considered getting a reverse mortgage? That would give you access to the house equity without monthly payments. A reverse mortgage? Yeah, it's perfect for people in your situation. You could stay in the house but get cash for expenses. Of course, it would reduce the inheritance value eventually, but given your financial situation, that might be necessary. Reduce the inheritance value. My middle son was already calculating how my financial difficulties might impact his eventual inheritance. I'll look into that option, Peyton. Great. And Mom? Maybe this is a good time to think about simplifying your lifestyle overall. You probably don't need all that space anyway. When I called Sloane with the same story, her response was perhaps the most revealing. Mom, this is exactly what I was worried about when Dad left. Single women your age really struggle financially. And honestly, you probably should have been more prepared for this situation. More prepared how? Career-wise, investment-wise, just generally more independent. But that's water under the bridge now. The important thing is finding practical solutions. Do you have suggestions for practical solutions? Well, you could probably get a part-time job to supplement your income. Lots of retail places hire seniors for customer service positions. And definitely look into senior housing. It's much more affordable and age-appropriate than trying to maintain a whole house. My daughter was suggesting that her 67-year-old mother get a retail job to make ends meet, rather than offering any family support or assistance. Some character assessments revealed disappointing truths about people you'd hoped would demonstrate love and loyalty. My character assessment was revealing that my children viewed me as an aging inconvenience whose problems required institutional or employment solutions rather than family support. And now I had to decide whether that knowledge changed how I wanted to use $340 million to shape the remaining relationships in my life. 2 weeks after discovering my children's true feelings about my supposed financial crisis, I was sitting in Catherine Walsh's office, reviewing what she called my behavioral assessment findings with the clinical detachment I'd developed during 40 years of nursing practice. The results are quite consistent, Catherine observed, reading through notes I'd compiled about each conversation. All 3 children immediately suggested institutional or employment solutions rather than offering personal assistance or emotional support. And the significance of that pattern? It suggests they view you as an independent entity responsible for solving your own problems rather than as a family member whose welfare is partially their responsibility. Even when I'm their mother who's facing genuine hardship, especially then. The willingness to provide family support during crisis situations is one of the strongest indicators of authentic emotional connection versus obligatory relationship maintenance. I thought about my children's immediate suggestions that I sell my home, get a retail job, or move to senior housing, rather than offering to help with repairs, medical expenses, or even emotional support during a stressful period. Catherine, what would normal family responses look like in this situation? Children who genuinely care about their mother's welfare would typically offer some combination of financial assistance, practical help with problems, emotional support during the crisis, and family consultation about solutions that preserve her dignity and independence, none of which my children offered. Correct. Instead, they offered advice designed to remove your problems from their sphere of concern and responsibility, which suggests what about their feelings toward me? That they love you as a family obligation, but don't feel emotionally invested in your well-being or happiness. The clinical assessment confirmed what I'd suspected, but hadn't wanted to acknowledge. My children maintained contact with me from duty rather than desire, and they viewed my problems as inconveniences to be managed rather than family challenges requiring mutual support. Mrs. Carmichael, how do you want to proceed with this information? I want to make one final test before revealing my inheritance. What kind of test? I want to see how they respond when I ask for something that would require them to sacrifice time, convenience, or resources for my benefit. Catherine nodded approvingly. Escalation testing. If they won't provide support during a financial crisis, will they provide assistance when you need personal help or family involvement? Exactly. That afternoon, I called each of my children to request what most families would consider normal intergenerational support. Quentin, I'm feeling overwhelmed by everything that's been happening lately, and I was wondering if you could help me with some household projects this weekend. The gutters need cleaning, and there are some heavy boxes in the attic that I can't manage alone. This weekend? Mom, that's really bad timing. We have plans with Blair's family on Saturday, and Sunday I'm playing golf with Dad and some clients. What about the following weekend? I'd have to check my schedule. You know, Mom, you might want to hire a handyman service for that kind of work. It's probably safer than having family members on ladders and in attics. Hire a handyman service. Rather than spending a few hours helping his elderly mother, my successful engineer's son was suggesting I pay professionals to handle tasks that families typically share. I understand, Quentin. I'll look into service options. Great. And Mom? You should really think about preventive maintenance contracts for the house. That way, you won't have these emergency situations. My conversation with Peyton followed a similar pattern. Mom, manual labor really isn't my thing. Have you considered joining one of those senior community groups? They often have members who help each other with household projects. So rather than helping me yourself, you're suggesting I find other senior citizens to assist with tasks you consider too inconvenient? It's not about convenience, Mom. It's about practical solutions. You need regular help with home maintenance, and I'm not available for that kind of ongoing commitment. I'm not asking for ongoing commitment, Peyton. I'm asking for a few hours of help this weekend. Right, but this weekend leads to next weekend, and pretty soon I'm spending every weekend maintaining your house instead of living my own life. Living his own life. Helping his mother occasionally would interfere with his personal priorities. Sloane's response was perhaps the most revealing. Mom, I love you, but I'm really not comfortable with heavy lifting or ladder work. Have you thought about moving somewhere that doesn't require so much maintenance? A nice condo or senior community where landscaping and repairs are handled by management? I'm not ready to leave my home, Sloane. But Mom, practically speaking, you can't maintain a whole house by yourself. Maybe it's time to accept that your housing needs have changed. My housing needs haven't changed. My family support has changed. That's not fair, Mom. We all have our own lives and responsibilities. We can't be expected to maintain your house indefinitely. I'm not asking for indefinite maintenance, Sloane. I'm asking for help with specific projects that would take a few hours. I understand, but that's just not realistic given everyone's schedules and obligations. Everyone's schedules and obligations. My children had time for luxury vacations with their father, golf games with clients, and social events with Blair's family, but no time to help their mother with basic household needs. That evening, I made my final assessment call, this time requesting emotional rather than practical support. Quentin, I've been feeling quite lonely since your father and I divorced, and especially during the holidays when everyone was in Aspen. Would you be interested in spending some regular time together? Maybe dinner once a week, or attending community events together. Mom, weekly dinners aren't really practical. Our schedules are pretty packed, and honestly, Blair plans a lot of our social activities now. What about monthly dinners? We could probably manage something monthly, though it might be easier to meet you at restaurants rather than doing home-cooked meals. That way, it's less time-consuming for everyone. Less time-consuming for everyone. Spending time with his mother was a time management problem rather than a relationship opportunity. And community events? I don't really see us attending community events together, Mom. Our social circles are pretty different now. Our social circles were different because his social circle now included his father's girlfriend and her affluent friends. While my social circle consisted of other divorced women, his age group considered socially irrelevant. When I made similar requests to Peyton and Sloane, their responses confirmed the pattern. They were willing to maintain minimal contact with me as long as it didn't interfere with their preferred lifestyle or social obligations. We love you, Mom, Sloane explained, but we need boundaries about how much time and energy we can invest in family obligations. Family obligations. That's what I'd become to my children. An obligation to be managed efficiently rather than a relationship to be nurtured. That night, I sat in my kitchen with documents worth $340 million and tried to decide what to do with the knowledge that my children viewed me as a burden rather than a blessing. Some parents discover their adult children's true feelings gradually over years of small disappointments and declining attention. I discovered my children's authentic priorities through systematic testing that revealed they had no interest in supporting, helping, or spending time with their mother unless it served their own convenience and social preferences. And now, I had to decide whether unlimited financial resources could change their feelings toward me, or whether money would simply make their calculated attention more elaborate and ultimately more painful. The character assessment phase was complete. Tomorrow, I would begin deciding how to use the results. 3 weeks after completing my character assessment, I was ready to implement what Catherine Walsh had termed strategic revelation, a carefully planned disclosure of my inheritance that would test my children's final responses before making permanent decisions about our relationships and their financial futures. I arranged a family dinner at Marcello's for the following Saturday, using the same casual tone that had characterized all my recent interactions with Quentin, Peyton, and Sloane. Just thought it would be nice to get together again, I told each of them. I have some news to share, and I'd prefer to tell everyone at the same time. The news comment generated immediate curiosity. Quentin called back within an hour. Mom, what kind of news? Is everything all right with your health? Everything's fine, dear. I'll explain everything on Saturday. But you can't just say you have news and then not elaborate. What's going on? It's nothing to worry about, Quentin. Just some developments in my personal situation that I want to discuss with all of you together. Personal situation? Mom, you're making me nervous. Are you sick? Are you having more financial problems? The concern in his voice was authentic, but I noticed it focused entirely on potential problems rather than positive possibilities. My children had learned to expect bad news from their mother, rather than good news. Saturday evening arrived with my 3 children sitting around our table at Marcello's, looking expectant and slightly anxious. I'd dressed more carefully than usual, not expensively, but with attention to details that suggested something significant was happening. Mom, you look nice tonight, Sloane observed. Is this about dating? Are you seeing someone? Not dating, dear, but thank you for noticing. So, what's the big news? Peyton asked, checking his phone with the impatience he typically displayed when forced to focus on family conversations. I've come into some money, I said simply. The response was immediate silence as my children processed this unexpected information. Money? Quentin repeated. What kind of money? Did you win the lottery? An inheritance. From my father. But Grandpa died when you were 2 years old, Sloane said, looking confused. That's what I always believed. But apparently my father didn't die. He abandoned my mother and me, and he lived until 3 months ago. I explained Archibald Thornfield's story in the same matter-of-fact tone I'd once used to discuss medical conditions with patients' families. The abandonment, the surveillance, the venture capital empire, and the inheritance structure designed to test my character before providing financial security. How much money are we talking about? Peyton asked, leaning forward with sudden, intense attention. $340 million. The silence that followed was profound and revealing. My children stared at me with expressions that cycled through disbelief, excitement, calculation, and what appeared to be immediate reassessment of our family dynamics. $340 million, Quentin repeated slowly. You're saying you're worth more than $300 million? I'm saying I've inherited resources that will change my life significantly. Mom, that's incredible, Sloane exclaimed, her enthusiasm more animated than any response she'd shown toward me in years. We need to celebrate. This is amazing news. When did you find out? Peyton demanded. How long have you known about this? I learned about it on Christmas night, while you were all in Aspen. Christmas night? Quentin's voice rose with apparent outrage. You've known for a month that you inherited hundreds of millions of dollars, and you didn't tell us. I wanted time to process the information and understand what it meant for my future. But, Mom, this affects all of us, Sloane protested. This is family news. We should have been involved in discussions about something this significant. How does my inheritance affect you? My question created another moment of revealing silence, as my children realized they'd immediately assumed that my good fortune would automatically benefit them. Well, obviously we want to help you manage resources this substantial, Peyton said carefully. This kind of wealth requires professional planning and family consultation. Family consultation about what, specifically? Investment strategies, estate planning, philanthropy decisions, Quentin listed. You can't just make random choices about hundreds of millions of dollars without considering the implications for everyone. What implications for everyone? Mom, you're being deliberately obtuse, Sloane said with irritation. Obviously, this inheritance changes everything about our family's financial future. We need to work together to make smart decisions about wealth management and distribution. Within 10 minutes of learning about my inheritance, my daughter was discussing how the money should be distributed among family members. I've actually been working with wealth management professionals for several weeks, I said. They've helped me understand my options and responsibilities. What kind of options? Quentin asked. How to use resources wisely for personal fulfillment, charitable giving, and family considerations. Family considerations, Peyton repeated. What decisions have you made about family considerations? I'm still evaluating that aspect of my situation. Mom, we need to be involved in those evaluations, Sloane insisted. This isn't just your money. It's family wealth that will impact generations. Actually, it is just my money. The inheritance is entirely in my name, with complete discretionary control over all decisions. But you'll want to establish trusts for your children, Quentin said confidently. Estate planning at this level always involves family trusts and inheritance structures. Will I want to establish trusts for my children? Of course you will. Mom, this is generational wealth. You'll want to ensure your children and grandchildren are provided for. What makes you assume I'll want to do that? The question created visible discomfort as my children realized their expectations might not align with my intentions. Because that's what families do, Peyton said, his voice carrying an edge of worry. Parents provide for their children when they have resources to share. Do they? What about when children provide for their parents when they have resources to share? What do you mean? I mean that for the past month, I've been testing your willingness to provide support, assistance, and attention to your mother during what you believed was a period of financial hardship and emotional need. Testing us? Sloane's voice rose with indignation. You were testing us? I was evaluating whether my children were capable of loving and supporting me as a person, or whether your attention was conditional on what I could provide for you. That's manipulative and unfair, Quentin protested. Is it? Is it more manipulative than immediately assuming that my inheritance should be shared with children who couldn't find time to help me clean gutters or eat weekly dinners together? Those situations are completely different, Peyton argued. How are they different? Because family wealth is different from personal favors and social obligations. So you view helping your mother with household projects as personal favors, but you view sharing her inheritance as family obligation? My children exchanged glances that suggested they were recognizing how their responses were revealing the very attitudes I'd been assessing. Mom, what exactly are you saying about our inheritance? Sloane asked carefully. I'm saying that I haven't made any decisions about how to distribute resources to children who've demonstrated that their interest in my welfare correlates directly with their perception of what I can offer them. Some family meetings end with hugs, shared excitement, and celebration of good fortune. Our family meeting was ending with my children realizing that their mother's sudden wealth might not automatically translate into their improved circumstances, and that their responses to both poverty and prosperity had been carefully documented as evidence of their true priorities. The character assessment was complete, and the results were about to determine whether my inheritance would bridge or widen the gap between my children and me. The 3 days following my inheritance revelation were marked by a sudden surge of attention from my children that felt both predictable and nauseating. My phone rang constantly with calls from Quentin, Peyton, and Sloane, each approaching my newfound wealth with different strategies but identical underlying motivations. Quentin called first, adopting the professional tone he used for business negotiations. Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation on Saturday, and I realize I may have seemed presumptuous about the inheritance. I want you to know that whatever decisions you make, I support completely. Thank you, Quentin. That said, I'd love to help you navigate the complex financial planning aspects of managing this kind of wealth. My engineering background gives me strong analytical skills for evaluating investment opportunities and risk assessment. I see. And obviously, I want to spend more time together so we can rebuild our relationship properly. I realize I may have been neglecting our family connection, and I want to correct that moving forward. The sudden interest in rebuilding our family connection was transparently linked to my financial status, but I responded with polite acknowledgement rather than calling attention to the obvious correlation. I'd enjoy spending more time together, Quentin. Great! I was thinking we could start with weekly dinners, maybe alternating between home-cooked meals and nice restaurants. And I'd love to help with those household projects you mentioned, cleaning gutters, organizing the attic, whatever you need. Weekly dinners and household help that had been inconvenient obligations a week ago were now opportunities for relationship building that might lead to financial benefits. Peyton's approach was more directly transactional. Mom, I want to apologize if I seemed dismissive about your financial concerns recently. I was dealing with some work stress that made me less available than I should have been for family support. Work stress that he'd never mentioned previously, but that now conveniently explained his reluctance to help his supposedly struggling mother. I understand, Peyton. Moving forward, I want to be much more involved in your life. In fact, I've been researching wealth management firms and financial planning strategies for high net worth individuals. I could coordinate meetings with the top professionals in the field. I already have wealth management assistance, dear. Right. But you'll want to get multiple opinions before making major decisions. This kind of money requires specialized expertise and family consultation. What kind of family consultation? Well, investment strategies should consider the next generation's needs and goals. And obviously, tax planning becomes much more complex at this wealth level. You'll need trusts and estate structures that protect assets for your heirs. My heirs? Peyton was already positioning himself and his siblings as inevitable beneficiaries of wealth they'd shown no interest in when they thought I was struggling financially. Sloane's strategy was the most emotionally manipulative. Mom, I feel terrible about how distant our relationship has become since Dad's divorce. I've been so focused on my own life that I haven't been the daughter you deserve. What's brought about this realization, Sloane? Honestly, learning about your inheritance made me think about how much time we might not have together and how I've been taking our relationship for granted. My inheritance made you think about our limited time together? Well, yes. I mean, knowing that you have resources for travel and experiences makes me realize we should be sharing those opportunities and building memories together. Sharing opportunities and building memories that involved my financial resources rather than simple time and attention. I'd like that, Sloane. Wonderful. I've already started researching mother-daughter trips we could take together. Europe, Asia, luxury cruises. We could have such amazing experiences. Amazing experiences funded by my inheritance rather than genuine desire for my company. By Thursday, all 3 children had invited themselves to dinner at my house for the weekend, expressing sudden enthusiasm for family time that they'd avoided for years when spending time with me offered no material benefits. We really want to be more involved in your life, Mom, Quentin explained during our Friday phone conversation. Families should stick together, especially during major life transitions. What kind of involvement did you have in mind? Regular family gatherings, shared decision-making about important issues, maybe even coordinated family investments or business ventures. Shared decision-making about my personal finances? Just guidance and consultation. You shouldn't have to handle these complex decisions alone. I won't be handling them alone, Quentin. I have professional advisors. Right, but professionals don't understand family dynamics and emotional considerations the way your children do. What family dynamics and emotional considerations should influence my financial decisions? Well, obviously, you'll want to ensure your children are provided for, and you'll want to consider how wealth affects family relationships and future generations. How do you think wealth should affect our family relationships? It should bring us closer together. Shared prosperity creates opportunities for shared experiences and mutual support. Mutual support that hadn't existed when he thought I was poor, but was suddenly essential now that he knew I was wealthy. That afternoon, I called Catherine Walsh to discuss what she termed post-revelation behavior patterns. Mrs. Carmichael, how are your children responding to the inheritance disclosure? Exactly as you predicted. Sudden intense interest in my welfare, offers to help with projects they previously considered inconvenient, and immediate assumptions about shared decision-making regarding my finances. And how does their changed behavior make you feel? Disgusted, honestly. The contrast between their responses to my fictional poverty versus my actual wealth reveals everything I need to know about their priorities. Have they explicitly requested money or inheritance guarantees? Not directly. They're approaching it through offers of family consultation and suggestions about estate planning that would benefit them. Classic wealth-motivated relationship modification. They're hoping to position themselves as deserving beneficiaries through demonstrated attention and support. Support they couldn't provide when they thought I needed help rather than had money to share. Exactly. Mrs. Carmichael, how do you want to respond to this behavior pattern? I want to give them one final opportunity to demonstrate authentic versus calculated interest in our relationships. How? By testing whether their sudden attentiveness continues when I make it clear that my inheritance won't automatically benefit them financially. That's a sophisticated approach. What specific test did you have in mind? Complete transparency about my actual inheritance plans, followed by observation of their responses when they realize that being wealthy doesn't make me a more generous mother to children who were neglecting me when they thought I was poor. Are you prepared for the possibility that they'll react with anger, resentment, or accusations of selfishness? I'm prepared for the possibility that my children's authentic feelings toward me are entirely conditional on what I can provide for them rather than who I am as a person. And if that proves to be true, then I'll use my wealth to build relationships with people who value me for reasons that have nothing to do with money. And my children will learn that some opportunities for love and generosity can't be recovered once they've been squandered. Some parents use wealth to buy affection from children who've been neglecting them. I was planning to use wealth to teach my children that authentic relationships couldn't be purchased retroactively, and that love offered only after discovering someone's financial value wasn't actually love at all. The final test would determine whether my inheritance would heal our family relationships or confirm that they'd been irreparably damaged by my children's inability to value their mother as anything more than a potential source of financial benefit. Saturday evening arrived with all three of my children gathered in my modest dining room for the first time since before Sterling and I divorced. They'd brought flowers, expensive wine, and the kind of animated enthusiasm usually reserved for job interviews or first dates with highly desirable prospects. "Mom, this pot roast is incredible," Peyton announced, taking a second helping of the same recipe he'd politely declined for years. "I'd forgotten what amazing home cooking tastes like." "You should cook for us more often," Sloan added. "There's something so special about family dinners in the house where we grew up. The house where they'd grown up, but had rarely visited since Sterling moved out and took their social aspirations with him. I'm glad you're enjoying dinner. I wanted us to have a comfortable setting for discussing my inheritance plans." The conversation immediately shifted from casual pleasantries to focused attention. My children set down their forks and leaned forward with the synchronized interest of people expecting to hear information that would significantly impact their financial future. "Mom, we've been thinking about everything you shared last weekend," Quentin began, "and we want you to know that we're here to support whatever decisions you make." "What kinds of decisions are you expecting me to make?" "Well, estate planning obviously," Peyton said. "Setting up trusts for your children and grandchildren, establishing charitable foundations, maybe family investment strategies." "Charitable foundations?" "You'll probably want to give away a significant portion of the inheritance for tax advantages and philanthropic impact," Sloan explained. "But you'll also want to ensure your family's provided for before making charitable commitments." "What makes you think I'll want to provide for my family before making charitable commitments?" "Because that's what responsible parents do," Quentin said with slight irritation. "You secure your children's futures first, then use remaining resources for charitable purposes. Do responsible children secure their parents' welfare first, then use remaining resources for their own entertainment?" My question created the kind of uncomfortable silence that suggested my children recognized the parallel I was drawing, but didn't appreciate its implications. "Mom, those situations are completely different," Peyton protested. "We're talking about generational wealth that affects the entire family's long-term financial security. And I was talking about immediate practical needs that affected my short-term welfare and emotional security. It's not fair to compare our response to temporary household projects with your responsibilities regarding permanent wealth distribution," Sloan argued. "Why isn't it fair?" "Because one involves major financial decisions that will impact generations, and the other involved minor inconveniences that could be handled by hired services. So my need for family support was a minor inconvenience that could be outsourced, but your interest in my wealth represents major family considerations that require personal involvement?" "You're twisting our words, Mom," Quentin said defensively. "We're trying to have a serious conversation about responsible wealth management, and you're bringing up irrelevant issues about household maintenance." "I'm bringing up relevant issues about family priorities and relationship dynamics that my wealth advisors have identified as crucial factors in inheritance planning." "Your wealth advisors think family relationship dynamics should influence financial decisions?" Peyton asked with obvious concern. "Absolutely. They've explained that how family members treat each other reveals character traits that should be considered when making inheritance decisions." "What kind of character traits?" Sloan demanded. "Whether people demonstrate authentic love and concern for family members, or whether their attention is conditional on potential financial benefits." "Mom, that's a terrible way to think about family relationships," Quentin protested. "Love and money are separate issues that shouldn't be connected through inheritance decisions." "Are they separate? When you thought I was struggling financially, you suggested I get a retail job and move to senior housing rather than offering any family assistance. But when you learned I inherited hundreds of millions of dollars, you immediately offered to help with household projects and spend weekly time together. Those are completely different circumstances. How are they different, Peyton? Because helping someone who's wealthy is different from enabling someone who's making poor financial choices. You thought my need for help with household repairs represented poor financial choices? We thought you were trying to maintain a lifestyle you couldn't afford, instead of adjusting to realistic circumstances. And now that you know I can afford any lifestyle I choose, you're offering to help maintain it? Now we're offering to be supportive family members during a major life transition, Sloan said carefully. Family members who weren't supportive during my previous major life transition through divorce and financial struggles. Mom, we're trying to move forward and build better relationships, Quentin said with forced patience. Why are you so focused on past issues instead of future opportunities? Because my wealth advisors have explained that past behavior predicts future reliability in family relationships. What does that mean for inheritance planning? Peyton asked, his voice tightening with worry. It means I'm using observed behavior patterns to determine how to allocate resources among family members, charitable organizations, and personal fulfillment priorities. Allocate resources among family members? Sloan repeated. What kind of allocation are you considering? I pulled out documents that Catherine Walsh had helped me prepare, official-looking papers that outlined my actual inheritance plans. I've established modest trust funds for each of you, $50,000 each, accessible when you turn 65. $50,000 each? Quentin's voice rose with shock and indignation. Out of $340 million? That's approximately what you might have inherited if I'd continued living modestly and saved carefully throughout my retirement. But Mom, you have hundreds of millions of dollars, Peyton protested. $50,000 is an insult given the scale of your wealth. Why is it an insult? Because it doesn't reflect the magnitude of resources available or the importance of family relationships, Sloan explained with barely controlled anger. What would reflect the importance of family relationships? Substantial trusts that acknowledge your children as primary beneficiaries of generational wealth, Quentin demanded. Primary beneficiaries based on what qualifications? Based on being your children. Being my children who refused to help me clean gutters suggested I get a retail job when I needed financial assistance and couldn't find time for weekly dinners until you learned I was wealthy? Mom, you're being completely unreasonable, Peyton said, standing up from the table. We're your family. We deserve better than $50,000 from a $300 million inheritance. What do you deserve it for? For being your children, for loving you and supporting you throughout our lives. When have you supported me throughout your lives? Specifically, when have you provided support that required sacrifice or inconvenience on your part? My children exchanged glances that suggested they were recognizing how their own words and behavior had provided the evidence I was using to justify inheritance decisions they found inadequate. This is blackmail, Sloan accused. You're punishing us for not being perfect children by withholding money that should belong to the family. I'm rewarding you exactly as you rewarded me, with minimal consideration that reflects the actual priority you place on our relationships. Some inheritance discussions involve grateful families planning how to use unexpected wealth together. Our inheritance discussion was revealing that my children felt entitled to resources from a mother they'd treated as an inconvenient obligation, and that their sudden affection was entirely conditional on financial benefits I'd decided they hadn't earned. The character assessment was complete, and the results were about to determine whether my final years would be spent buying love I'd never actually received or building authentic relationships with people who valued me for reasons that had nothing to do with money. 6 months after revealing my inheritance plans to my children, I was standing on the balcony of my suite at the Four Seasons in Prague, looking out over the city where I'd been spending the past month learning Czech cooking and volunteering at a local children's hospital. This was my 4th international destination since I'd begun what Catherine Walsh had termed my wealth integration journey, using my resources to build a life based on purpose rather than obligation. The response from Quentin, Peyton, and Sloan to their $50,000 inheritances had been exactly what my wealth advisors had predicted: anger, accusations, and attempts to guilt me into reconsidering my selfish distribution of family wealth. Mom, you're destroying our family over money, Sloan had declared during our final dinner together. This inheritance should bring us together, not drive us apart. The inheritance isn't driving us apart. I'd replied. It's revealing that we were never actually together in any meaningful way. That's not true. We love you, Mom. You love the idea of having a wealthy mother who can enhance your lifestyle. You never showed interest in loving the actual woman who raised you. Quentin had attempted a more strategic approach, involving Sterling in conversations about my emotional instability and poor judgment regarding inheritance decisions. The kids are really concerned about you, Sterling had said during his carefully orchestrated phone call. Maybe you should consider family counseling to work through these financial decisions together. Sterling, you left me for a younger woman and took our children on luxury vacations while I ate leftover turkey alone on Christmas. You're the last person I'd consult about family relationships. But this inheritance affects everyone's future. The kids have legitimate expectations about generational wealth. The kids have expectations based on entitlement rather than earned consideration. They'll receive exactly what they've demonstrated they value: minimal resources that reflect minimal investment in our relationship. Peyton's response had been the most revealing, involving threats about legal challenges to my mental competency for making inheritance decisions that no rational mother would make. We could have lawyers review your psychological fitness for managing this kind of wealth, he'd suggested, with the cold calculation he'd probably learned from Sterling's insurance business. Please do, I'd responded. My wealth management team has extensive documentation of my mental acuity, and they also have detailed records of the family dynamic assessments that influenced my inheritance decisions. I'd welcome legal examination of who's behaving rationally in this situation. The legal threats had disappeared quickly once my children realized that competency evaluations might reveal more about their motivations than mine. Now, 3 months after our final family meeting, I was living a life that felt authentic for the first time since before my marriage. I'd sold the house in Cleveland, the house where my children had grown up but rarely visited, and donated the proceeds to a foundation supporting divorced women over 60. I'd established Phoenix Rising Enterprises, a consulting company that helped women navigate financial independence after late-in-life divorce. The business was thriving, not because I needed income, but because I'd discovered that my experience with betrayal, recovery, and empowerment could help other women avoid the isolation and self-doubt that had characterized my first 5 years of single life. Mrs. Carmichael, said Dr. Elena Novak, the pediatric oncologist who'd been supervising my volunteer work at the Prague hospital. The children have been asking if you'll be returning next month for Maria's surgery. Absolutely. I've already arranged to extend my stay through her recovery period. Your check is improving remarkably. The staff has been impressed by your dedication to learning medical terminology. Learning new languages at 67 feels like proof that life doesn't end just because your family decides you're inconvenient. Dr. Novak smiled with the understanding of someone who'd observed how meaningful work could transform people's sense of purpose and value. Your contributions here have been significant. The family support program you've helped develop will benefit patients for years to come. That evening, I had dinner with Marcus Weber, a 70-year-old Austrian architect I'd met during my volunteer work. Marcus was widowed, financially comfortable but not wealthy, and completely unaware of my inheritance beyond the fact that I could afford international travel and extended volunteer commitments. I've been thinking about your invitation to visit Prague next month, he said, as we walked along the Vltava River after dinner. I'd like to accept, but I want to be clear about my financial limitations regarding expensive restaurants and luxury accommodations. Marcus, I invited you because I enjoy your company, not because I want to impress you with expensive entertainment. I appreciate that, but I've noticed that you seem quite comfortable financially, and I don't want mismatched expectations to create awkwardness. His honesty about financial concerns contrasted sharply with my children's assumptions that my wealth automatically benefited them. Marcus was worried about being able to afford his share of our time together, while Quentin, Peyton, and Sloane had felt entitled to multi-million-dollar inheritances based solely on biological relationships. Marcus, what if I told you that I'm quite wealthy, but that your financial situation doesn't affect my interest in spending time with you? I'd say that wealth doesn't determine character, and that I'm more interested in who you are as a person than what you can afford to buy. And if my wealth enabled us to travel together or enjoy experiences you couldn't afford independently, I'd be grateful for opportunities to share experiences with someone I care about, but I wouldn't expect or demand access to resources I hadn't earned. The conversation reminded me why my relationship with Marcus felt authentic in ways my relationships with my children never had. He valued my company for emotional and intellectual reasons that had nothing to do with material benefits, and he appreciated generosity without feeling entitled to it. My phone buzzed with a text from Sloan. "Mom, I hope you'll reconsider your inheritance decisions. We miss you and want to rebuild our relationship." I deleted the message without responding, as I'd been doing for 3 months. My children missed the wealthy mother they'd hoped to benefit from, not the actual woman they'd been ignoring for years. My family left me alone on Christmas to go skiing in Aspen, saying I couldn't keep up and would be inconvenient. That night, lawyers appeared at my door. I'd inherited $340 million from the father I thought had died when I was 2. When my family returned, I tested whether they'd help me during a fake financial crisis. They suggested I get a retail job and move to senior housing. When I revealed my inheritance, they suddenly wanted weekly dinners and to help manage my money. I gave them each $50,000 and used the rest to travel the world, start a business helping divorced women, and build relationships with people who value me for who I am rather than what I can provide. At 67, I was no longer Dot Carmichael, the abandoned mother whose children found her too boring for Christmas vacation. I was Dot Carmichael, founder of Phoenix Rising Enterprises, international volunteer, world traveler, and woman who'd learned to distinguish between love and financial opportunism. My children had received exactly the inheritance they'd earned through years of treating their mother as an obligation rather than a relationship. And I was using my father's patient capital philosophy to invest in people who appreciated my character rather than my bank account. Some inheritance stories end with families reunited through shared prosperity. Mine ended with the discovery that authentic relationships couldn't be purchased retroactively, and that the most valuable inheritance I could give myself was the freedom to build a life based on genuine connection rather than biological obligation. Marcus Weber loved me for reasons that had nothing to do with money. My children had proven they were incapable of loving me for any other reason. The difference between those relationships had determined how I chose to spend both my wealth and the remaining years of my life. And every morning when I woke up in Prague, or wherever my travels had taken me, I felt grateful that abandonment on Christmas had led to the discovery that some families are worth leaving behind in favor of people who understand that love is about presence, not presence. The end.